So thanks for joining us. Today I have Scott Schara, who is the father of Grace Schara, a 19-year-old girl with Down syndrome who tragically lost her life during the pandemic, not from a virus, but from, horrible tyrannical hospital protocols. And Scott has fought just tirelessly just to get her story out. He waged a long, hard legal battle against the perpetrators of what I would consider murder. I'm sure he does too, at Ascension Health Hospital. Unfortunately, that did not have the outcome that we had hoped, but it did raise awareness. And I'm bringing him on today because he has a book coming out on March 10th. And it's called "Is the Government Legally Killing Us?" Am I right, Scott? Tell us.
You've got it right.
Okay, good. Tell us about the book and what motivated you to write it.
Well, in a nutshell, the book proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the government has legalized medical murder, and it's by design. And in fact, medical murder is the number one cause of death in America. So that's the 411 on the book. It's intense, yet it's gentle at the same time. What motivated me to write it, of course, is my best buddy. I just don't want anybody to ever lose their best buddy, even my worst enemy. And when the jury trial was over, that was June 19th, you know, my personality is to never stop. I have been a business owner over half my life, and you just go, 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 go. And so I didn't take a break, and I started working on a series that I had taken 4 months off for the trial called Escaping Babylon. And, that's the macro view. If you step all the way out, you think, okay, we are in Babylon, and God tells us to escape Babylon, to not participate in Satan's systems. And anyway, so I started working on that again, and God ultimately put on my heart in August, write down everything you've learned about the medical industrial complex. And that's about 4,000 hours of research.
Mm.
Uh, so I started writing, thinking it's going to just be an extra long Substack broken into sections. And I had Dr. Margaret Aranda review it because I wanted to make sure it's technically right. When I do research, it's one thing to look at something and read it, and then my habit is to go to the source documents, but then I wanted another set of eyes from the medical perspective to see, okay, is this right? And she came back and said, not only is it right, this has got to be a book. So then I had a different perspective. And I sent the draft of the book to a friend of mine. God has his ways of orchestrating things in your life. And this friend of mine I met 20 years ago, his name is Jeremiah. And I sent it to Jeremiah. He's a publisher. I said, Jeremiah, will you read this and consider publishing it? So he read it and said, well, this doesn't fit in my wheelhouse, but I'll help you self-publish. And then he said to me, this is the blinding flash of the obvious. He says, people are going to want to know about grace, not just everything you learned about the medical industrial complex. So then, it's like, of course. So then there's an introductory chapter now about grace, then what actually got us into this fight. And then the last chapter lays out Grace's last day on earth, blow by blow, with the medical records, letting the reader conclude, what did Grace die from? The guts of the book are designed to wake people up. I wrote it from that perspective, which is the only perspective I know how to write from. And, so somebody like you who's already awake, as you know, I mean, you did a very nice endorsement for the book. It's on the inside cover. In fact, I'll show you your name. I just got this. This is my
Oh
only
yeah.
copy because it's not available for print yet. It just came. It comes out on the 10th, but Ingram Sparks sent me this copy as a proof copy, and so here's your name right in the inside cover
Oh, exciting.
with your endorsement. So anyway, I wrote it from the perspective that somebody who is awake, of course, I want those people to buy it, but then when they'll see everything that they know is all in one place now. And then we indexed it, so it's a research book, but also it is written from the perspective because I weave Grace's story and our legal battle throughout the book, so that somebody who's not awake would read this and get involved in the book and wake up in the process. So that's what I'm hoping that we can, break out of the echo chamber by doing this book.
Yeah, prior to this happening to Grace, had you ever had to deal with the hospital system? Had Grace ever been hospitalized before? Had you ever had anything like this happen? Were there hints, or were you blindsided by what happened?
There were hints, but I didn't pay attention to them. And there was also some good hints. So, I mean, the first hint was the day Grace was born. The day, well, actually, even before that. So, uh, how Grace even came into the picture is my wife and I, my wife's name is Cindy. We're 39 years old. We had been chasing the American dream. So we already had 2.1 kids, 1.7 dogs, no cats, getting ready to, banking money for early retirement, just the
Mhm.
same thing everybody does, right? Paying your taxes. We're just we were obedient slaves to the system. And God put on our heart to turn over the baby department to Him. So we did when we were 39, and He blessed us with Grace. Well, during the process, so then we had a midwife, and we still had one foot in the hospital system. So we planned on delivering in the hospital. So I sat down with the business department because we didn't have any in baby coverage, right? We just had catastrophic coverage with our medical insurance, but no baby coverage. So I said, "What is this all going to cost?" And they said about 20,000. And so I said, "Well, what if I pay cash right now?" So I sat down with the business department, and the business manager said, "If you write a check for 8,000 now, we'll call it even." So I mean, that gave me, so that was a nugget, right? So, oh my
Well,
gosh, there's that kind of
that's
markup in
impressive.
the
You were
system.
ahead of the time. I mean, that's it's very progressive. I mean, I'm assuming that was 19 years ago, so I'm very
Yeah.
impressed by that. Okay,
Yeah, it was actually in 2002 because Grace died when she was 19. So it was actually, so what is that, 24 years ago already? Anyway, so now Grace is born, and I was in the hospital room with Cindy. We had done none of the testing, so we didn't do an amniocentesis. We didn't do anything.
mhm.
We may have done an ultrasound. I don't remember. Cindy would remember. Ultimately, though, Grace is born. She comes out, and I said to Cindy, "I think she has Down syndrome. She just had the features, right?"
Yeah, yeah.
And the doctors had a huddle outside of the room. They came in. One of the doctors came in about a half hour later and said, "We suspect your daughter has Down syndrome. Do you want to keep her?"
Whoa.
And so at that time, I mean, I had no idea about child trafficking and organ harvesting. I didn't know anything. I just assumed that what they were talking about, because he even said, we have people waiting in the wings for children such as these. So what does that mean? Well, I presumed adoption because I don't know anything. Uh, anyway, then Grace was not pinking up. They wanted to take her by ambulance to a NIC unit at another hospital, which unbelievably was the hospital that Grace was killed at.
Oh,
Uh, but in the NIC unit, I mean, they actually did a fine job there, so that was a positive experience. But to get her there, I mean, it's just amazing to me. So this will really tell you how progressive I was. But I'm a business owner, so as a business owner, you just learn to deal with things differently than most people. So uh, I signed the paperwork to send Grace to the other hospital that had a NIC unit. And so then I said, we're going over to that hospital. And they said, "Well, you can't. Your wife has to stay here overnight." I said, "She's not staying here overnight. We're going to the hospital." In
oh.
fact, we had a Suburban at the time. I said, "I'm bringing up the Suburban to the entrance. And if you don't have the paperwork signed in 20 minutes, I'm just taking her with me. So
I love
get your
it.
paperwork in order."
I
So
love it.
that's, but all of that said, I was,
That's foreshadowing. That is
yes.
you were a fighter from the start.
Well, I was a fighter, but ultimately, I did not know how to really advocate. And, as we jump ahead, interestingly, Grace, uh, about, let's see, she died in October. In April, we had to take her to the emergency room for some little complication, and they did a phenomenal job. So it's not, it's if they did every single thing wrong every single time, all of us would be awake, right?
Right, right.
But a lot of things they do right. So they did that right. They did the NIC unit right. And I'm just going to give you one more story, and then we'll get to what I did wrong
Mhm.
with Grace's hospital stay, because this was the biggest nugget that I was given as far as the system. And if I would have paid attention to this, Grace would be alive today. And I tell the story in the book. This was May of 2018. We still had conventional medical insurance, catastrophic. But even that insurance said if you go in for a physical when you're 55, it's only $300. I thought, okay, I'm going to go in for my 55-year-old physical, May of 2018. So the doctor does a physical, and then he said, do you want to do a CT scan of your heart? And I said, well, I don't know. Why would I? I'm fine. He said, well, we're doing a special. It's normally $2,000. It's only $80. So I couldn't turn down the deal. I do the CT scan. And the next day, they called me and said, you need to come into our office immediately. And so that's the call you never want to get, right?
Right,
And so I
right,
went in the next day, and they told me you have a 1200 calcium score, and that is the OMG level.
right.
And so I said, what's the cause? And they said, well, you have high cholesterol. I said, well, what's the solution? The statin. And praise God, I didn't just roll over. And so I left, and I called a doctor friend that Cindy and I graduated from high school with. Her name is Sue. And I told her what I just told you. And she paused, and I was in the car when I talked with her. I said, Sue, you want me to just pull over and call an ambulance? She said, well, Scott, that's a bad score. And I said, well, what should I do? And she said, well, my husband just had a heart attack 2 months ago. I'm doing some research. I'll send it to you. So she did. With her research, and then I read a book by Dr. William Davis called Undoctored. And I started connecting the dots and realized very quickly cholesterol is not even in the top 10. In fact, that's a lie. High
Mhm.
cholesterol that is bad for you is a lie. And so consequently, then I dug into the statin. Oh my gosh, the statin is a lie too. The statin causes dementia. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I go back to the doctor. And to my surprise, he was gracious. I showed him my research, and he said, Scott, what you have learned here is 10 years ahead of what I know. So that was a compliment to him.
Yeah, yeah.
The nurse, and this is the nugget. So the nurse walked me out, and she said, Scott, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear. I said, well, what is it? She said, you have to take the statin. I said, I don't have to do anything. She said, let me explain. Our Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates are based on what percentage of our patient population follows the standard of care.
Mm.
And the standard of care for your level of heart disease is the statin. And I said to her, I'm not on Medicare or Medicaid. She said, you didn't hear me. It's based on our entire patient population. And so if there's enough people like you who are not willing to follow the protocol that we're telling you need to follow, we have to fire you as a patient to keep our reimbursement rates up. And that is the secret I reveal in the book.
Mhm.
That is how the federal government, through Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, controls 100% of allopathic healthcare in America, period. And, we get into discussions about things that are traps. And you and I have had this discussion before with Greta, and I think it's so important. I just want to bring it up again because the doctrine of informed consent is the discussion. So, I mean, I'm just going to read it so that everybody knows what I'm talking about because I printed it off this morning for the interview. So this is the AMA, American Medical Association Code of Medical Ethics 2.1.1, informed consent. And it says that specifically informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatments so that they can make well-considered decisions about care. So that seems logical, except for the only informed consent discussions they can have, assuming they even have one. I mean, you're one of the few people. I mean, you have an open mind and you have a caring heart. So you would have always given informed consent. I just have that sense about you. But I mean, most of the doctors that I've run into, like the one I had with the heart situation, he was decent, but that isn't the norm. The norm is they're aloof. They're above you, you're below them. So they generally tell you what they're going to do after the fact. They don't talk to you about informed consent. Well, here's the dilemma with informed consent. So we get into we demand, we want informed consent. We demand that. The problem is we're demanding informed consent within two barriers, which are evil and less evil. And the barriers are called standards of care. So the standard of care for cancer is cutting, radiation, or chemo. That's what they can give informed consent on. If
Right.
they give you informed consent on ivermectin, then they lose their license. I mean, you know this, and so that's the problem with the informed consent argument. So we end up in a trap, and we're tacitly and proactively agreeing that this standard of care model, which is controlled by the federal government, is what we want, and that's not what we want. We want informed consent about everything. So that's the problem with this informed consent debate. And I promised you that I would tell you the mistake I made in Grace's hospital stay, so that we connect the dots fully. And I know you have questions, and I'm rambling, but it's important that I just want to finish up that story so people understand. First of all, if I had to relive the situation with Grace, I would have never taken her to the hospital. We had decided to follow the less evil frontline COVID critical care doctors protocol. And that protocol said if your oxygen saturation drops below 94%, take yourself to the hospital because it's an emergency. Grace just went in with an 88% oxygen saturation and a cold. She was fine. And her and I were horsing around. It's ridiculous that she's dead 7 days later. Um, so it's very frustrating, but I shine the light on myself because I did not, even the FLCCC protocol at the time had a signal, because you're asking, did you have any signals? Sure, there was a signal right in the protocol, because in their protocol they were promoting wearing masks. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, they knew better than wearing masks. I mean, no doctor on earth would have thought that a mask is going to, it's insane. But I mean, we were lied to about the whole mask thing, as of course I mean, you knew before, right at the beginning, because you knew it wasn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, that being said, I would have never taken Grace to the hospital. But if I had to replay it and she objectively needed to go to the hospital, I know how to advocate now. And the secret to advocating is understanding you must, absolutely under no uncertain terms, you must be in the leadership role. And I'm not talking about legally. We had a durable medical power of attorney on Grace. So legally, I was in the leadership role. But the reality is, I was subservient to the doctor. The doctors were telling me things versus me laying the groundwork to say right at the beginning, I am in charge of Grace's care,
Mhm.
and you can do nothing to my daughter without me understanding and agreeing to it,
Right.
period. And
Right.
if they didn't agree with that, you fire them. When you fire a doctor, the hospital has an obligation to provide another one. If they are still of the same mindset, you leave.
Right.
So then that mindset would have been exposed early on in Grace's care. We would have just left. Grace
Right.
was fine. There
Right.
was no reason. I was under the impression the ER physician even agreed with me. It wasn't, Grace's hospital stay. She just said, I think we should check Grace into the hospital for 3, 4 days as a precautionary and put her on oxygen and a steroid. So that was the premise that Grace went in. You
Right.
know, it's very, it's
Well,
frustrating, Mary, but
you
thank you
know,
for letting me, thanks for letting me ramble.
well, I mean, it's prior to the pandemic, any reasonable person would have thought they could take their loved one to the hospital and not worry. Yeah, that's the say that's where you go to have your life saved, and you shouldn't have to question every single thing the doctor recommends, right? Yeah, I mean,
Correct.
they go through training and they take an oath, and it's not prior to the pandemic, we put our faith or put our trust in the doctors to do the right thing. But, obviously things dramatically changed during the pandemic, and you do not deserve any of the blame. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but the blame goes to the professionals who just violated ethics and with their closed-minded approach and protocol-driven approach. So tell us sort of what happened when once Grace got into the hospital.
Well, once Grace got into the hospital, it's quite interesting because we we watched movies and horsed around the first day. It was fun. Um, they ended up putting her on a sedation med called Precedex. She had an overdose to that med on the evening of the first day, October 7th. I did not know she had an overdose because they don't tell you anything. And as soon as a patient is on Precedex, instantly the room changes from a regular room to an ICU room. So I mean, I'm not a dummy, but yet, you know, at the trial, I had to explain to the jury that I didn't even know Grace was in ICU
Right, right,
because she never changed rooms.
right.
The re How I found out she was in ICU is I had when I requested the medical records, also requested the invoicing, and that's where I saw it. The
Wow.
invoice it flipped on October 7th from a regular room charge to a ICU room charge. I thought, I wonder why that happened. Was it just about money? And then I learned as I researched Precedex that you can't administer Precedex unless the room is ICU. So they do that flip of the switch.
Mm-hmm.
This is insane what I'm telling you. And so then the next, I'll just share a quick anecdotal story that happened. So she had a second overdose on the 8th, the morning of the 9th. Grace is, she's kind of herself again, and she's so dang funny. So she said, "Dad, can you get me some food?" She had a BiPAP mask on at this point, of which, of course, I didn't approve of that either. She never should have ever been on this stuff. But I'm just following along, right? I'm subservient to what the doctors are doing. And anyway, so she started signing, and I don't know sign language. My wife taught her sign language before she could talk when she was a
Oh,
baby. And so she started signing, and so then I remove her mask. Said, "Dad, can you get me some food?" I said, "Well, what do you want?" And she said, "I want ice cream and bacon."
oh,
And,
oh.
it's just so funny. So I mean, she's in a hospital. You can have whatever you want, Grace. So I ordered ice cream and bacon. I started feeding Grace. And the nurse came running in and said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Well, her oxygen saturation is only at 85%." And I look at the monitor. I say, "Oh yeah, it is at 85%." But I had that pulse oximeter with me in the room, so I put it on Grace's finger,
Mm-hmm.
and it read 95%. So I called the nurse back in and I said, "Is my meter accurate? Because it's reading 95% and yours is reading 85%." She said, "Yeah, it is accurate." I said, "Well, why is my meter, my $50
Right.
meter, you've got a sense of my personality." So I said to her, "Why is my $50 meter more accurate than your $50,000 meter?" And she said, "Well, because the leads get sweaty." I said, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "If you know that, why aren't you changing out the leads proactively?" And she shook her finger at me then and said, "You should just be thankful you caught this."
Oh
And
my.
it's interesting, they have a vested interest in underreporting oxygen because what was the goal during the pandemic? It
Right.
was to get the person on a ventilator because that was like triple sevens on the slot machine. It was a $300,000 payday. So it's Anyway, I was escorted out by an armed guard on October 10th. Grace was alone for the very first time
Wait,
in
wait,
her
wait,
life.
wait. Hold on. Why
Yeah,
did you try to assault a nurse? Why were you escorted out of the room by an armed guard?
great question. Yeah, so the nurse came in at 7 o'clock in the morning on October 10th and said, "You need to leave immediately." She had an armed guard with her. I said, "Well, what's the reason?" She said, "Well, the last shifts of nurses don't want you in the room. Number one. Number two, you've been shutting off the alarms. And number three, we suspect you have COVID."
Uh,
So I
uh,
I defended each one of those things. So the first one, the that shift of nurses right before, I got into a dispute with the last shift of nurses because they would not feed Grace. And I bluntly told the nurse that was in the room, I said, "This is what so Grace has a BiPAP on, respiratory therapy comes in, they swab Grace's mouth, to keep it moist, and they removed the BiPAP, and then they put a vapotherm on, and so this whole process is a 10-15 minute process. Grace's oxygen saturation is fine. We can feed her that way.
Right, right,
Grace could feed herself, but I mean, not with the BiPAP, right?
right, right,
And the nurse said, the doctor's never going to approve that. I said, I don't care what the doctor approves. I am in charge of Grace's care.
right, right.
And well, it didn't come to blows or anything, but I mean, I was frustrated. I said, I want to talk with the attending physician. And instead of her referring me to the attending physician, she went to the head nurse, and the head nurse took over. And so then the next, shutting off the alarms. I mean, think about that.
Those
It's so
alarms
stupid.
go off all the, the
And
alarms are
the nursing staff taught me how to reset the
right,
alarms.
right. Because
It's so obvious, but they make it sound like I'm a criminal for doing this. And
right,
then, we suspect you have COVID. The hospitalist told me I'm going to get COVID. So I said, well, no kidding, I have COVID. I've already had COVID for 3 days based on my symptoms. It's
right,
no biggie.
right,
I'm here
right,
for my daughter. I
right.
don't
She's
care.
already got, right,
Right. So what's the difference? I mean, and on top of that, I learned, when we prepared for the trial, she was in a negative pressure room. And, and all you dummies have spacesuits on and you're triple jabbed when you come in here. I didn't say
right,
that, but I mean,
right,
that's,
right.
my thought process now, right? So who are we protecting? Anyway, so then so I'm defending myself, and she got to the point where she said, listen, we're going to call the Appleton Police Department if you don't leave. I called an attorney friend of mine who's been my business attorney for 25 years, and his name is Tom. It was a Sunday morning, and I called him and said, Tom, what do you recommend? Here's the fact pattern. He said, I just think you should leave peacefully, Scott. And so we were under the impression that, my wife was really sick, so she couldn't come in, but we were under the impression Jessica, our daughter, could come in and replace me. So Jess got to the hospital, and they refused entrance. So we had to hire an attorney to
Wow,
negotiate with the hospital attorney to allow us to have advocacy.
wow.
All this stuff, I mean, all this got brought out to the trial, Mary, and you can't hardly believe that we lost. And I get it. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that we lost too, but um, I'm not surprised. And I'm not surprised because if you just think about the jury was not people like you and me.
Right,
It's, if 80% of the population has been triple jabbed, 80% of the jury is triple jabbed, and they just
right.
follow whatever the white coat says. I mean, you're going up against a system. You're going up against a Antichrist Goliath system, and it's near impossible to win in a courtroom. So then, just to finish up Grace's hospital stay, during the 48 hours that there was no advocate in the room, they increased Precedex dose rate 7 or 8. Yeah, no, in the 40, it was 7 different times they increased the Precedex dosage rate. So they sedated my little buddy instead of taking care of her. Ultimately, when you turn the page into onto Grace's last day, Dr. Burdine, our expert, by studying Grace's records and the reactions that she had to Precedex, said bluntly, anybody that gives Precedex to Grace above zero point 0.7 micrograms per kilogram per hour is doing so deliberately because
Mhm.
it's wrong. She's had the reactions and they're known. So you
Right.
can't do that to somebody. And already at midnight, they went above that, went to zero point 0.8 by 8:40 in the morning. They were at maximum dose 1.4. And that happened to be the window where the nurse told my daughter, Jessica, you have to go home to take a shower. You can't take a shower in the room because you
Mhm.
can't wear your PP in the shower. So during that hour, Grace wanted to get out of the bed to go to the bathroom. Instead of letting her, they strapped her down to the bed, increased the dose of Precedex to the maximum allowable dose, and it went downhill from there. We had a call with the doctor after he strapped her down to the bed. And he said on the phone, so I mean, this is a direct lie. He said, Grace had such a good day yesterday. We should get her out of bed and we should get her on a feeding tube so that she can get home in the next several days. Well, that wasn't obviously the intention. If you just strapped her down an hour before the call. So we approved a feeding tube in that call that, based on that prognosis, and that led to using lorazepam with Precedex And the nurse had the authority to do that too, because the order was already there, and these orders were all PRN. So
Mm-hmm.
they have the authority within that order to do these things. She gave her 2 doses of lorazepam on top of the first one when she inserted the feeding tube, 3 minutes apart. When she charted Grace, the same nurse charted Grace as somnolent. Grace's blood pressure was non-detectable at 6:09 p.m. At 6:15, they gave Grace morphine.
Yeah.
Dr. Burdine, in his testimony on the stand, said this was the worst clinical decision he's ever seen in 46 years of medical practice. And Grace died at 7:27, an hour and 12 minutes after the morphine. So that med combination, Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine, that's what you use in hospice care when you're euthanizing somebody.
Right.
And when it came time to revive Grace, I mean, this was really the most egregious to me. And yet the jury said this is the standard of care that you can illegally put a DNR, a doctor can unilaterally, illegally put a DNR on a chart without a signature, without a witness, without a bracelet, without any approval. And he can just do it unilaterally. And we learned that the doctor put a DNR on Grace's chart 1 minute after that morning phone call with Cindy and I, when Grace was having a cardiac event. And we all were screaming, save our daughter. And that's when we learned she was DNR. Jess called Cindy and I on a FaceTime call. We're screaming to save our daughter. And the nursing staff from outside the room said, she's DNR.
Wow.
And we screamed, she's not DNR, save our daughter. And they
Oh,
refused. They obeyed that DNR order instead of coming in and giving Grace the reversal drugs. So anyway, we watched her die on that call at 7:27 p.m. on October 13th to 21. And of course, our life has changed. It'll never be the same. But praise God, Grace was a martyr. So because of that, she's saved thousands of lives already. But for me personally, she woke me up. And because of that, I have an obligation to share what I've learned. And um, God's given me some abilities to do things. This writing a book. I never thought I'd write a book, but yeah, I'm thankful it's all in one work. I have been a prolific writer since Grace died, but I never thought I'd write a book. I have a bunch of Substack articles and things like that, but now it's all in book form, and it's all in one place, and I am thankful to have it done.
well, writing a book is no easy endeavor, and especially given the circumstances, and you're in mourning. But I hope everybody will read it because the story is just unbelievable, and it's not a single incident. I mean, I reviewed charts. I wasn't in the hospitals during the pandemic, but I have reviewed charts for friends and patients of loved ones, and I have seen euthanasia. One case in particular was a man who was, he was in bad shape and it looked like he was going to die, but they hastened his death with morphine and insulin. They documented a zero pain scale. So why were they giving morphine? And his blood
Exactly.
sugar was 120. You wouldn't give insulin for a blood sugar of 120. And he died 3 to 4 minutes after they pushed those drugs. So it definitely was happening, not just in Grace's case, not just in this patient's case. And I have urged the OIG of HHS to investigate these hospitals because the justification I think was, oh well, we need the beds. And I think your Grace's case was even worse. But I think in the case where I was looking at, where he looked like he was going to die, that's the only explanation I can think of. But what, in broader terms, what have you learned about the system, and how do you think we can change things?
Yeah, so what I've learned about the system is COVID exposed the system, and it has exposed it in a dramatic way. I mean, there was 1.1, or excuse me, 1.2 million people who died in hospitals in America during that 39-month scam. And so that's a lot of people, but it's when you frame it in terms of the world, we only have 4% of the world's population, India's population is four times that of ours, and yet their hospital death toll was 534,000, less than half, and yet their population is four times ours. So that tells you something about the American hospital system. What COVID did differently. So COVID was the first time that hospitals were directly incentivized. And not only were they directly incentivized to do things to kill you, most people are familiar with remdesivir and ventilators. So those were countermeasures that the hospitals were directly incentivized to use, and they were known to kill people. On top of that, the hospitals were advanced money. So it wasn't after the fact that, okay, we did this, here's our invoice. They were advanced money to make sure that there were COVID patients. So, I mean, think about if a hospital is advanced $10 million, now they have a financial incentive. They don't want to give that money back. They have a financial incentive to make sure that you are a COVID patient. And so that's where, the triggers start where, okay, now we don't have to pay that money back. So that's a big deal that happened with COVID. I believe nobody will ever be held to account for that because they're all in on it. This is a much bigger deal than what people think. I mean, we are under a population reduction agenda. So COVID exposed that, but now so zoom out. This whole standard of care model. So now have been indirectly. So COVID was direct payments to kill people. They've been indirectly doing this since the early 80s. And that's the standard of care model came about when the HHS department was formally came into existence in 1980. And then the Chevron doctrine in 1984 allowed the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services to the bureaucracy to implement policy without any congressional oversight. And so now they've implemented policy by deciding what codes fit the standard of care. And the standards of care are designed to hasten death. Like I said, the standard of care for heart disease is the statin. The standard of care for cancer is cutting radiation and chemo. Statistically, if a person lives 5 years and one day after getting chemo, this is across the board, they are an anomaly because 97.9% of their fellow people, friends who got chemo have already died. So they're an anomaly. So you think about, well, why would they do that? It's because we're under this population reduction agenda. The first stake in the ground that I expose in the book is in 1905, which is the collectivism doctrine from Jacobson versus Massachusetts. That's a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court decided 7-2 in favor of the state and said that in times of great danger, we lose our liberties. And the government gets to decide what liberties we lose. So without Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905, they could have never pulled off COVID. They could have never said there's mask mandates. They could have never said shot mandates. But because of that Supreme Court decision, that facilitated COVID. So that's why I don't like to focus on COVID. There is an all court press right now. If you're paying attention to it, I mean, this is the lane that I'm in. I really pay attention to this, and they're trying to frame COVID. They, meaning the minions, are trying to frame COVID as a mistake. Well, no, COVID wasn't a mistake. COVID exposed this entire system, this whole allopathic medical industrial complex system that is designed on purpose to hasten death. So that's the big picture.
So, what can we do?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So this brings up the fact that men have to be told at least two times to be able to. So thank you for bringing that back up, Mary. So what can we do? Uh, well, I can first tell you what we can't do because that's what seems to be the trap that everybody's in right now. Is we fall for peace and safety every time. God warns us of that in First Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, that we should not be duped by peace and safety. And in First Samuel chapter 8, the Israelites, 250 years after God parted the Red Sea, wanted a king. And they went to Samuel the prophet and said, we want a king like all the other nations. And Samuel warned them, and he went to God, and God said, well, give them this specific warning. If you want a king, the king is going to make you a slave. And so Samuel tells the people, they said, well, we want a king. So God said, give them their king, but I'm not responsible. I warned them. Well, that's where we're at. I mean, we want a king to save us. We instead of the king. So we want the president, the HHS secretary, we want them to fix everything. Well, they're not going to fix everything. They'll never cut off the head of the snake. And so we got to stop wanting that. The fact is, all of us have become complacent. We're lazy, and we just want this hospital system. Think about is there another industry that doesn't disclose their pricing and has no accountability for their choices if something goes wrong? There's not another one. And yet we go along with it. So our fear of death is the main thing that I'll point to. So our fear of death allows or facilitates us, not allows us, it facilitates us participating in this evil. And that's what we all have got to repent of. And that's the answer to this. We have to come to grips that the reason this is that bad is we have systemically over at least the last 120 years, what I expose in the book, we have turned over our birthright to the state to take the place of God. And that's what we have to repent of. And then God's hands are untied, and then he can help help kill the beast. So that's what we can do. We can stop participating. So all of us, once you come to grips with this, you can stop participating. Get a medical professional that is outside of the system. If they accept Medicare and Medicaid, they are bound by their license to follow the standards of care that are dictated by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So why would you ever go to somebody that is bound by that? It doesn't make any sense. Personally, we stopped having medical insurance. We have a nurse practitioner who is not in the system. She's cash pay. So that's what we've done personally. It just makes sense. I mean, I don't want to be in this system anymore.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. Fear is a huge motivator, and they use that against us during the pandemic. And yeah, as much as we can stay outside the system. I just got elected as a precinct chair. And so I spent last night drafting 14 different resolutions. And yes, it's probably a big waste of time, but can you think of anything, at least on a granular level, anything that would have possibly helped Grace or could help people in the future in terms of reining the tyrants in?
Well, I'd absolutely recommend on a simplistic level. I mean, we've got to use the tools at our disposal. So I used to do estate planning as a CPA. I've worked with attorneys doing estate planning, and the concept of a medical power of attorney, the way they were historically written, is that two doctors had to agree that you're incapacitated. And then the power of attorney takes over. So I don't recommend that. I recommend a durable general power of attorney that is active upon signing. We had that with Grace, by the way, yeah, but it didn't matter. So there's never been a document. There's never going to be a law that saves your life.
Right.
So we had the durable general power of attorney, a medical directives document. So when you put your cards on the table, these are the things in writing that are in the medical chart that you can and can't do. So it's in writing. But again, think through it. That's never going to save your life, because if you end up being killed in that system in spite of having the power of attorney, in spite of having medical directives, what are you going to do? There's no accountability in that system. So to me, the most important thing that anybody could ever do is, if you go into a hospital, you have to have an advocate, and that advocate has to be awake, and not just awake, but understand what the leadership role is in that setting. And I'm positive you can save a person's life if you're in the leadership role. There's going to be times when objectively you end up in a hospital. So I get that. But, to understand your first step should not be a hospital. I had an emergency since Grace's death. and I would have went to the emergency room. I called the nurse practitioner and and I said, this is what happened. I showed her a picture. I had a big, it was where I had a hole in my arm that was the size of a silver dollar, and and uh, and I said, I can't go to the emergency room. They'll kill me. I mean, I am public enemy number one.
Right.
Um, and so she gave my wife the bandaging instructions. So we really worked on that bandaging, and God healed that wound with the bandaging instructions. So, it's a different paradigm. If you
Right.
start with the premise that, and this will sound crazy when I say it, but I'm not crazy. Uh, if you start with the premise that the question of the book, uh, is the government legally killing us? If you start with the premise that yes, they are legally killing us, and CMS, the hospital system, they're all arms of the government. So if you start with the premise they want to kill you, you'll be safe.
Yeah.
Because that changes your paradigm.
Yeah. No, it's really sad that that's the world we live in. So tell it everybody again. The book comes out March 10th next week. No, yeah,
Yep.
Monday.
Yeah.
Monday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yep. March 10th. This is the cover. It's it's really a awesome work. I mean, I think you'll like it. You won't be disappointed getting it. 100% of the proceeds are going to Grace's nonprofit. Mary's endorsement is inside the cover. She did a great job endorsing the book. We received 54 endorsements, Mary. Yeah, I
Yay.
had no, I don't know anything. I'm just a dad, right? And so
Yeah,
I sent out requests to a whole bunch of people, you included, and they graciously wrote back, and it's like, wow, this is it's pretty neat.
that's awesome.
Anyway, the book is available now for pre-order on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, on Goodreads. If you go to Grace's website, ouramazinggrace.net, you'll see a picture of the cover on the front page. If you click on that picture, we have a separate page just for the book, and it has all the links to those three sources where you can buy it. And so it's available in hardcover, it's available in Kindle. Unbelievably, for the last 4 days, we hit number one in
Awesome.
pre-orders. I can't hardly
Amazing.
believe it. Yeah,
That's
so,
amazing.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing to me.
Well, good. She's worth the legacy of Grace lives on, and you are so commendable for your fight. And thank you so much. And let's everybody out there buy several books, send them to people that need to wake up, or people that maybe aren't the enemy, but just are a little bit clueless. That's probably the biggest problem we have out there is just lack of awareness. So send it far and wide, buy several copies. And thank you, Scott. It's great to talk to you again. This is, I think, our third time, and we'll have you on again soon.
Well, I really appreciate you, Mary. And yes, these your friends who are not awake are not our enemy. Satan is the enemy. So people are not our enemy. They're just waiting to become our friends.
Love that.